Hey friends, welcome to Eyezz. I'm Jarrett New, and today we're going to be talking about how to set up your turntable. This is the second video in a series that will cover the entire process from start to finish. Feel free to share these videos with all of your friends who are just getting into records. In this video specifically, we'll be dealing with the Cartridge and Headshell. Now, if you haven't watched the first video in this playlist, click this card above to start at the beginning. Also, to keep these videos organized, the thumbnail of every video will display their number. That way you can watch them in order. Alright, so now that we know all the parts of the turntable, the first thing we need to do is attach the cartridge to the headshell, and then connect that assembly to the tonearm. Now, if your turntable already came with the cartridge attached to the headshell, then you can skip ahead to this part of the video. Okay, now let's take a look at what the finished assembly will look like. First, we have the headshell, which is this entire gray part at the top. Next, we have the finger lift, which is the part that we grab to move the needle where we want it to go. Next, we have the top screws. These two screws sit on each side of the cartridge and connect it to the headshell above. Speaking of the cartridge, here it is. The cartridge is this entire black part with a shiny silver finish on the underside. Next, we have the stylus, also called the needle. This tiny part rides in the record grooves. Next, we have the nut. There are two of these, one on each side. They attach to the bottom of the top screws and keep the cartridge held firmly in place. Next, we have the lead wires. These small wires connect the electrical components of the cartridge to the headshell. These wires are important because they carry the electrical signal from the record to your turntable. The four wires are color-coded, and we'll get back to that in a second. And finally, we have the end of the headshell, which connects to your turntable. So this is the final assembly. Feel free to pause this video if you want to become familiar with all of the parts before we move on. Now, the first thing we need to do is attach the cartridge to the headshell using the top screws. Line up the cartridge holes with the headshell holes above, then place the two top screws into the slots on the top of the headshell. Now that the screws are joining the two pieces together, place the nuts onto each screw from the bottom. You can twist the nuts in place using your fingers and then use a small flathead screwdriver to tighten the top screws from above. You want to line up everything so that the top screws are in the center of the headshell holes. We'll adjust them later, but for now, place them in the center. Okay, now that that's done, we can get back to the four lead wires I talked about. These wires are usually connected to the headshell when you buy it. Now here is a simple diagram of the headshell and cartridge connections. First, we have the headshell connections. In this demonstration, I'm using the Audio-Technica Universal Headshell. The connected wires are white, red, blue, and green. The placement of these wires is usually the same with every headshell. Next, we have the cartridge connections. I'm using the Audio-Technica AT95E cartridge, and here are the connections that correspond to the wires: white, red, blue, and green. The placement of these connections could be different for you if you're using a different cartridge, so be sure to check your cartridge manual or go online to find out. Okay, now that we know where everything is, all we have to do is connect white to white, red to red, blue to blue, and green to green. I'll talk about how you can do this in a second, but for now, here's some important info about these four wires and what they mean. White means left channel, red means right channel, blue means left ground, and green means right ground. Feel free to pause this if you need to. Okay, now you may be wondering, how do I connect these wires to the cartridge? They're really tiny, they're really small. Well, the simple solution is to use a pair of household tweezers. These are really the perfect size for working with the lead wires, but be careful not to damage the fragile wires themselves. Only hold the wires by the metal ends when you're pushing them into place. Now, it might take time to connect them, but I promise a little patience will pay off big time. Once you've connected the cartridge to the headshell using the top screws and the lead wires, all you have left to do is to connect the entire assembly to the tonearm. This can be done by placing the end of the assembly on the tonearm and then twisting the neck to lock it in place. Alright, now that you've set up the cartridge and headshell, be sure to click this card above or this annotation to watch the third video, which will be covering the tonearm. And as always, give this video a thumbs up and hit subscribe. I'm going to be coming out with a lot of great videos every Thursday and Saturday that you're not going to want to miss. Be sure to find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and more. All the links are in the description below. And most importantly, friends, Keep spinning that vinyl.